Really neat company.
Sweet. We'll get started in a second here. So today we're talking about responsive design and a bit about SaaS. This far into the week, maybe some of us are feeling a bit like this. It's definitely challenging to get CSS to cooperate with us at times, but we'll get better at it, and it gets more consistent the more you do it. There's also some tools we'll look at today that, in my opinion, makes CSS development a lot more consistent, for me at least. So we want to think about responsive design. This is the idea that there should be a dynamic experience for font, layout, images, all of the content that we're showing to a user, so that it works well on any device screen size, whether that be phone, notebook, or like giant super monitor screen. We gotta be flexible. We want a uniform UI experience for all users. And we're gonna look at how to do that today with just CSS. Some small CSS changes can have some drastically change the user experience on these different kind of screen widths. So we're looking at pure CSS responsive design. That's not the only way that responsive design happens. So for example, we're looking at YouTube. They've got their site here. This does not appear to be mobile friendly, right? We're scaling it down to small widths, and we're getting like internet's really struggling to. There we go. We're getting pretty kind of unfriendly 3 columns for a really small width. And this isn't because like YouTube has like just decided not to have responsive design. It's because the way that they're accomplishing responsive design is with mobile versioning. So if I have my mobile view in Chrome before I look up YouTube, at the top here we'll see that I'm actually fetching a different like subdomain of their site, m.youtube for mobile, and we get like a totally different layout. So YouTube's approach is they're not only just conditionally applying different CSS, they're actually giving a totally different web application depending on whether you're viewing it in your desktop or whether you're doing it in your mobile. That's like one approach. There are tons of other applications out there that take a more simple approach to dynamic websites. I mean, GitHub is like okay. Here we have the same site. And as we change it, we get 2 columns, 1 column, and 3 columns when we were at the full width. Whereas something like Wikipedia no thanks. Oh yeah, did you hear the big yesterday's news? Yeah. I know, that's pretty crazy. They're also using like a mobile version, so not a great example actually. But we're looking at doing more of like this GitHub approach where we have one site, and based on the sizes of the screen and based on more dynamic units of measurement in our CSS, we can have a nice experience for small, medium, and large screen sizes.
Is there any advantage to having m.youtube.com and youtube.com? I mean, apart from the obvious fact about the CSS, like, why couldn't they have just implemented that thing, like put up breakpoints so that when we drag our screen to a smaller screen, it would column thing?
Yeah, I mean, and they could have, but that can take you only so far. If you want to actually change how the layout is organized, so they throw this little menu bar on the bottom. That's not something that exists in the normal YouTube. It exists over here. I mean, maybe we want to just have very intense CSS rules that like completely change how this menu bar on the left looks. But maybe we actually want to change the HTML so that for this version it's different. I don't know their particular reasons for making the change, but my motivation for using a different mobile version would be if I want to actually change the underlying like HTML and JavaScript. And if I wanted to make the site that I'm serving people, I guess, lighter weight. Because if we're doing one site that has all these different media queries and other responsive tools that we'll look at today, if we want to do like a whole really intensive overhaul like YouTube does, we have to have all the code and styling and CSS there for both versions and give it to someone, whether they're going to be viewing it on a desktop or whether they're going to be doing it on mobile, and then just half the code, probably not half the code, but like this big chunk of code is just useless for certain users.
So like more complete makeover would make complete sense for heavy applications to become lightweight in the mobile version.
Yep, but of course there's also like this downside right here. Like if I am accessing the site on a mobile platform, there are queries that let YouTube know to serve the mobile version. But if I'm just using it on desktop and I like shrink the screen down, I'm not on like mobile, but now I'm getting this kind of like crappy experience. So there's pros and cons both ways. If I were YouTube, I would probably do a mix of both. Like I would want this site to be a little more responsive and then also have the mobile version. So different options. But just to start off with, there are some, so we're going to look at percentages, EMs, view widths, media queries, Flexbox, and Sass. But there's some responsive tools that we already have or that we've already started to see. We've seen percentages. We might have started to see EMs and view widths. These ones are probably newer than percentages. But both of those can help us make websites that are a bit more dynamic. So throughout this lecture, we're going to be working on making kind of a classic banner, couple column, and then like footer website. The like they're like this format here. I don't know. I just wanted the image. The like banner, some columns, 3 columns, and then like a footer. So start off, I'm just going to make 2 files. One will be index.html, and the other will be a style.css. Our index file, just quickly include our style sheet. And then in our header, we will have, or in our head, no, not in our head, in our body, we will have a header. And this is where maybe like the logo would go. Then we're going to have a footer at the bottom. And in between, we'll have like a main div. And we can throw in 3 maybe columns. We could give these like a class of content, maybe. We've got a header for the top, our main content area that will have 3 columns or 3 chunks of content, and we'll see how we should arrange those to make it more responsive, and then a bottom footer. Over in our style, we'll grab the header and footer. We'll make these kind of look the same to start with. They can have like a width of like 80 pixels or something. Not a width, a height. Their width should be 100%. We'll give them a padding of 20 pixels, and then a background color of like a salmon. Then we have our main. We'll give this a background color like a wheat. And we'll see if that's fine. And our main divs, we'll give these a width of 300 pixels, a line height, so the height of the text that goes inside each of these. We'll do 300 pixels, and then we'll say that just put a number in each of them for now. The background color, we'll do, this guy looks nice. And the font color, we'll grab our header color again. And so that these 3 boxes are kind of separate from one another, we can do like a margin of 20 pixels or something. And ta-da! Oh wow! So obviously, I've linked our style sheet wrong. Let's check in here. Style.css. Style.css. That would not make a difference. What am I thinking? We can always look into the application to see what we're loading in. Or sorry, sources. So yeah, we're not getting the CSS. Anyone got a keen eye to spot what I've done wrong? Sorry? Yeah, this should be rel. And then this is, I still think should be href. Oh, and there we go. Let's have it so that each of these is in line. So we can do a couple things are not coming through. Oh no, our numbers are good. They're taking up full width. Let's just make them bigger and let's center them. And then we need to get our header and footer grabbed correctly. And it should be header, comma, footer, because we want both headers and footers. This will go font size. What should we do? Like, how much? 50? 50 might be still too small. And then we'll do text, align, center. There we go. Sort of. And lastly, we'll do display. The dog. So we have our layout here. We've got the top header. We've got our three things in the main content, and then we've got a footer. We got a few weird things showing up. Like, why is this space here? And we're using inline blocks, so we do get kind of like somewhat of a dynamic feel. But once we get too small, it's like not working so well. And we also get this weird empty space here when we're getting bigger. I've used a width of 100% for our header and footer, but also for our main div. Oh no, this guy is just being, the main is just taking up the space that it can. So we could also give this a width of 100%. Yeah, totally. So the first thing we're going to look at is the difference between 100% view widths and EMs. So what is our understanding of the percentage unit so far? It's a percentage of the viewport. Okay. Any other thoughts on it? It's the percentage of the parent. Okay, so both a little bit different, because if our parent is smaller, then the viewport, the percentage will be different in both of those cases, right? In the case where we have, this guy, no. taking up like 100% of the viewport essentially. 30% of that compared to 30% of this will be almost the same. But if we go in here and we say the main should be, like we want some gutters on either side, it should be 80%, and then we'll do margin auto. Now we're going to get a difference between, and we can even look at that. Let's try change this to be, each one of these is going to be 30%. And our margin will be 3%. No, it'll have to be less than that. There we go. So we're getting 25% of the parent in this case, and that is going to be most often the case when you're using percentages. Percentages are always referring to the parent, but they're not, in the case of width and height, it's not always a percentage of the parent's width. And we'll see an example sooner, but you should think of it as a percentage of the available width that it has to it. So each of these boxes potentially has this much width to fill. But they won't necessarily take up all that space. So when we start to get into Flexbox and we talk about width percentages, it won't be 100% of the Flexbox, it'll be 100% of the available width that each element has. With other percentage measurements, because we can use percentage on margin, we can use percentage on font size, we can use percentage on anything that we can put a pixel percentage on. It's a percent of that parent's corresponding value. So if we did in our main, which is the parent of our div here, we did a font size of, we had 50 pixels. And then in the div, we do a font size of 100%. We still get the same thing. If we're going 50%, we now get a smaller font, and the smaller font would be 50% of 50, so we'd have 25 pixels for our font. There's another dynamic measurement that looks a little bit similar to percentage, and that's view width and view height. And this is like truly a percentage of the total viewport width or the total viewport height. So this gives us a little more absolute control. Our parents can be changing width and changing height depending on how our content is looking like. If we want to set like this container here to 30% of the view width, like no matter what happens in the rest of the DOM tree, we can do like a view width on it. So 25 view widths, we get bigger, and this will be 25% of like the whole screen that we have available there. View heights function in the same way, but give us a dynamic height. Last measurement or pair of measurements is EM and REMs. They are both measurements relative to font size. So here we said our font size would be 50 pixels. In our div, we can use EMs for any size measurement, most commonly, of course, for fonts. But if I do 1 EM, I'm saying 1 unit of whatever my parent's font size is. So this again will be like 50 pixels. Or 2 units of whatever my parent is. So this will be 100 pixels. Or 0.5. These could be nice if we're creating like, say, our header, and we formatted the whole header with EMs, and now we have a single parent font size that we can change to kind of like double the size of everything inside of it, or shrink the size of everything inside of it. If we don't want such a relative number, if we want to set the font size of this div so we like absolutely know what it is, we can also use REMs. REM is relative to the document's default font size. So while this will be 0.5 because the parent is 50 pixels, if we say that the root font size is 12 pixels, then REM will be referencing that size. So we'll go 1, and we get like our small font here. So if you want everything to be relative to single point, you can use this. If you want stuff cascading from the parent, you can use just EM units. In our case here, like, we would probably use, or we could use a combination of a few things. Our main content, we probably want to do a percentage of the view width, so we don't have to think about any. We're getting some weird stuff here from padding either by the body or the HTML thing. I don't want to have to take that into account if I'm doing a percentage of this wheat color. I want maybe just 80% of the entire document. So I'll go 80 view widths here. Inside the main document, I'm probably more likely to use percentages because I'm wary about overflowing onto the side, especially if we were doing like just block elements. If we just have a block element and I go, and this would be hard because I think it's at 80 widths, but if I go up to 90, I now have some like overflow happening. So I never want overflow. I can just make sure that all of my percentages from the horizontal direction all add up to 100. So my width could be 30%. 30 was too big. We had 25%. And then our margin, we're getting 2 on either side. So we could probably do 3%. Oh, there we go. So we get it like that. And we're somewhat responsive. As we shrink and grow, we get our 3 columns changing size. Except here where it's popping down, anyone have an idea why we get this? That's probably what is happening, but why? Because if I'm giving, the margin is also relative to the size of my parent div. So if a 3% margin exists here and the width is 25%, it's still proportional. Why would this break the proportion? Yeah. So we're at this point, we're getting to the point where, no, I don't think so actually. I mean, we can test it by dropping down to a lower percentage. I think what's happening is if it is our font, we can go overflow hidden. Well, think about it. I'm not exactly sure, actually, because we should still get it, even without the number. The mystery. I'll check into it during the break a bit. But so this is our first option for just getting stuff more dynamically. When we have things, especially images or big chunks of content, we should start thinking about using percentages and view widths as a dynamic measurement so that when we change the width of our browser, they also change for us. Next, we're going to jump back over here and look at media queries. So media queries are useful when you want to modify your site or app depending on certain conditions. You can also select for how your application is being used or viewed, whether it be print, screen, or screen reader. You can have media queries to see which way someone is interacting with your site. And then you also have characteristics and parameters, how you can conditionally apply CSS, such as screen resolution or browser viewport width. This is the one we're going to be concerned with, and it's the one that helps us with responsiveness. But beyond that, media queries help with a lot of other conditional CSS in your applications. So we can select for these different media types. Print is actually literally for when you can do Command P on a web page and it brings up the printed version. You can format your page differently depending on if someone is trying to print it. Maybe include less images, maybe align it for the 12:8 paper size. If you're doing screen or if you're accommodating for screen readers. And then you have a bunch of properties that you can query against. There's a bunch of these. Orientation might be a good one actually for dynamic content. Resolution. But most often we're going to be thinking about width. So we can do a media query like this, at media, and then we declare what medias we are querying for screen, print, or speech. And then we give our parameters that the CSS will be applied for. So here we're saying only do this style when the screen is within 600 pixels. So from 0 up to 600 pixels, we can apply certain things. So hopping to our example, bottom here, maybe for smaller screens, we want our div to be like 100% width. But we're not limited to like anything really in here. We can do any set of selectors, any set of style properties. I mean, we could just say the whole document, we're going to set the color, the font color to red. Over here in our browser, give a refresh. And then for responsive stuff, it's always helpful to see the dimensions of our screen. So as we're reducing it, when we get below 600, we see the pop. Our columns are now 100% of the kind of middle content area, and all of our font that can be changed is turned red. Maybe we don't want the gutters anymore when we're in that small viewport range, so we can also say the main div should be a width of 100% as well. And then we can go width 90%, margin 5%. Then I'm also going to just get rid of that annoying no. Where is it coming from? Oh, it's a margin on the body. There you go. So we get a nice little change there. There's one thing to be careful about when we're using media queries, and that's designing for the exception of mobile. So here, my size is less than 600. That was what my query is for, but I'm still getting the like big media query version. And this is because the history of it is originally when mobile devices first started getting browsers, there wasn't a lot of responsive design. So their approach was to take the normal view of something and say like, hey, let's just scale it so that phone views think that they're viewing it at like desktop sizes. So it will kind of be complementary. We're just taking what's available on the desktop and shrinking it down for mobile. And then essentially, when we're looking at it in a small view, the phone or the mobile browser thinks that its view width is different than the actual view width that it has available here. And to bypass that, all we have to do is in the head of our HTML document, just specify that for this page, we want to set the device width initial scale to 1. So like 1 to 1. Whatever the actual width of our device is, set that in pixels for the document. So doing this, we now get the change. Mystery number 2. No spaces.
Why do you have spaces underneath the footer?
Space here. There?
Yeah, like on the desktop version.
Uh, there's not. This is like over scroll. So like you can disable that too if you want.
Drag your thing to the right.
Oh, you mean this?
No, I mean decrease the size of your element that console. Yeah, thingy. Yeah.
Smaller.
Go to the right. See underneath the footer you have that white space.
Mm.
You didn't have that before. I mean the footer was touching the bottom.
So this white space right now is just because there's not enough content in my stuff to fill the whole page. And before I had it, they were dropping down into columns so that we got pushed to the bottom. There's a couple of ways we could think about this. I could set like a minimum height to my content to say like, hey, this should at least always be, 100% of my view height. So I'm always going to have a footer that hits the bottom. Or I could, like we looked at earlier in the week, have my footer be absolute and set to the bottom. I've got some different options. The one mystery to me is here. No, we do still have the space. It's just easier to see in mobile. We've got that extra space. So our header is bigger than it should be. We've set the width to 100%, padding at 20 pixels. Does this key anyone off onto what's a matter? We're setting our width to 100%. Shouldn't it just be 100% of the parent? What could be the problem if we are also setting padding? Yeah. So what we should have done right at the beginning, said all box sizing border box. Now we still have the over scroll, but we don't have. Ooh, that might have been. No, it doesn't look like it was. Could that have been our problem for the other thing too? So we're good now. I think it might have been. So let's. Oh, no. Cool. Any questions on media queries? The other things we can do, like we can do the inverse of this. We can do a min width. So everything above 600. Let's say the main if we did this, it's kind of pointless because we could just set this as a normal style up here, right? And have it be overridden by our smaller one. But just to show that we can set the opposite, we have, when we're bigger than 800, we get the green. When we're, I guess we could also go like light gray in here. Yeah, just let me make sure yeah, so we get the gray and then the big one.
So, I know when we were designing, like we would pick specific media queries for device sizes. Is there like a standardized place where we can look and see like it changes so often, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what the best practice for where to set your media queries?
Mhm. So there is no like best breakpoint to use necessarily. Like it's not like, oh, only use a breakpoint at, like here we did 800 at 600. Um, the two things that like help determine that is, yeah, one, your content. Like you can just gradually scroll and see where your stuff starts to look bad and pick that as a breakpoint and change it there. The other thing you might want to think about is if you're designing for particular devices, you can look up the device widths for those. So if we really want to make our application work on like tablets, we can look at like the most common tablets. Like we open the iPad, it's a 768 by 1024. That's maybe a breakpoint we want to think about. Or we open up, iPad Pro, and these are also good to like think about because here we're not getting our mobile version of it, even though, well, I guess we're at 100%. Yo, iPad Pro is huge actually, so never mind. But you want to play around with it because depending on like pixel density and things like that, even if the device is a bit smaller, it might have um, different, like look different on your breakpoints. Like here, maybe we're like, hey, this is actually too small to get this format. We should do a hard break at 768 pixels or whatever. Yeah, so like they're not standardized, but use your best guess on how your content looks and on which devices you're using. Um, and we definitely need to set that viewport when you wanted to make it usable by phones and or even your mobile view thing in here. We'll take a 15-minute break. We'll come back at 11:02. I'm going to explore why I think that thing's happening. But when we come back, we're going to look at Flexbox, whew, and then some SaaS stuff later. All right. What up? Hey, what's up?
Few questions that like, but don't really like almost.
Yeah.
There's like so when I every have no also now, but yeah, so it transfers by something here. And now it'd be really nice if we knew what song we were listening to, right? Instead of like not saying anything. So um, we can do that by pressing this, but right. So it was like it would be also really nice if we could see like what time it actually, right? Could do this. But you get what I mean? So
Yeah.
I've tried like playing with their API and like the different endpoints to get the
Yeah.
appropriate information, right? And then don't press this button. This button will break everything. Again, please, because that's a refresh thing. You know how the access token like expires every hour?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't. I, I'm close, but yeah. Okay, so my question is, if I press next, the default behavior that we the desired default behavior is that the song will go to the next song, and the title and picture will change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, only the song changes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've done, I mean, obviously there's different ways of setting it up, right? But but these are all the functions that are like these are essentially the API calls, and I've like just encapsulate like I've wrapped them in my own like custom name function, right? And then I pass those into the components. This is a fucking mess. I'm sorry. I'm new, right? I'm just experimenting. I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing.
Yeah.
Please don't scream at me. So then, what I tried doing, so I've written it down. I've written like what I tried. So kind of working. How can I get the promises to chain properly, right? So I have tried chaining them in sequence, so calling one and then the other, which doesn't work because like obviously because this is a promise, right? This is a call Spotify dot skip to next. This is the next track is an API call, so it's an async thing, right? So dot then I should whatever I want happen next, it should be in the dot then, right? So I've tried that too, and it doesn't work. So okay, so next track is the next track, right? And then when we hit that, we want to display, we want to set the title and the picture, right? So we want this function. We want get now playing, right? We want to wrap that in there. But we don't want, this is a function definition, so we don't want to do that. We just do a callback, right? You call that function inside the then, right? Like so here, we can cancel like that's fine, but why don't we do a callback? Right, like this, and then in here has to call back in, right? Be like, dude, what do you mean call back? You didn't give me a call back, right? So, oh, not use callback? What? I didn't even know that was a thing. Hello?
There's a custom hook you can use, or there's a hook you can use for that. But that's probably beyond what you need.
Yeah, right? Like that's beyond the scope of my knowledge right now. I mean, I know of hooks, but I don't know how to use them, right? And I don't have hooks imported. I don't have to import it, right?
Here, come. Let's sit.
So I just told you that every day I just like come bug you with like more stupid questions. So like this is what I tried. I'm like, okay, we'll pass the function in as a callback, and then we'll call it inside the dot then. So then if we save this and then go to song controls, it it works not in the way I want it to.
Yeah.
It changes, but it doesn't like the song title and the song title and the song is where the album art is not the current one. Is the one before. Is like lagging. Yeah.
And that would be because like where do you pass in this callback?
So song controls, right? This is like the on-click event. Like click and it happens. So then I pass this in. I tried this and this. Like I don't know. They all work. Both of them work, but they don't work in the way I want it to work. Right, next track, that's the thing we just passed the callback in. Right? We just changed that function. Yeah. And then I'm passing in props dot. I'm also passing in this function. So it's just like a function inside a function.
Yeah.
Like this should work, no?
Well, you're getting like a stale version of the state probably. Callback would be
whatever the fuck. Yeah, this is responsible for the title and the art, and this is responsible for the time. It's like two endpoints. Yeah, like. Yeah. I mean, I might be able to do it in one call because we just need the current track, right? So the play state is like we can ignore that one. So, but let's just figure out like one thing.
This is just the API itself.
Yeah, that's right, the object. And then it has a like default.
See, you have to kind of make this call after the other one because you need it to get the most recent thing. So,
right. But that call is wrapped inside my own. I don't see why.
So why? You don't need like you can just go this dot. What is it? Get current track.
Yeah.
Like what's stopping you from doing that?
I don't know. So we don't need the callback, or we still need the
Well,
callback?
probably not. No, like, I mean, we can. This is where you're passing it in.
Yeah. Get rid of that. Okay. Good.
Yeah. Cool. And then.
And here we don't need the callback.
I mean,
We don't even need
it's
it.
not doing anything.
This dot get so this will refer to the promise that came back, right? Because this lives inside the dot then.
Well, you're using an arrow function, so this will refer to whatever.
Afternoon.
Yeah, you should be fine. Let's
Try it
see.
out.
Do you have?
Do it.
Is it?
It's Google Chrome. Well, it's auto saves because it's React, right? So this. So well, the song's playing, but I like that. I love it.
It's like the worst.
It's the worst.
Okay, give it a try.
Yeah. App. 67. Line 67.
Yeah, we have it. Get current track.
Well, I've bound this.
So we don't need.
Yeah, inside this we have access to the app. Always there. Like the way.
Oh, did you bind
I
playtrack to?
bind that these I'm importing these. That's not good. Because if I put all of them back here in the constructor, then I don't have to do this shit. But like I just thought it was like attach everything.
I think that's where you're getting your problems. So.
All the way up.
Yeah. Just looking. Song controls have all of these.
Yeah. True problem.
Oh yeah, they're all.
Where's your no
Or which function?
this state is stored in the
In the parent, in the app.
app.
Yeah, it's in the app. That's why I bind the get current track. This dot set state. So if you state isn't
Yeah.
If you gotta go
Yeah, we're gonna have to look at this a little more in
later.
detail because
I'm doing some
the
weird
way you're
shit,
passing it around is
It's weird.
yeah.
What would you suggest me like while in the meantime that like in the meantime like what is something that I can do with my current knowledge and capability? Just tell me what I gotta do, sir. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it for you.
I would explore because right now here in next what is it next track.
Mhm.
So this is referring to the app.
Mhm.
So we saw that
Mhm.
inside here.
Mhm.
This should also be returning to the track of the app. So
Mhm.
log this in there. Also like current time duration. Like just artificially set one of these and see if it changes propagating through. Like is it just no? Because nothing was changing, but
Well,
it could be
could-
saying to no.
it-
So like I would just go like name and see save that. Isn't it?
Oh, so now playing it. Oh, we're setting that
Oh, it's inside now. I see.
like an object. Okay. Assumption.
Wait, this came up.
But on this end. Wait, so it's good. It's good. I can just do this dot, right?
Yeah, what is not the only thing that's not showing up here correctly is what the
Is the song, which is the other function.
yeah. So like
Thank
link
you.
that in there. No worries.
Thank you. You're a god.
You
Wait, so,
d-
okay, okay. I understand like your principle. I need to I need to call the thing.
yeah
In order for it to be, I need to do it in the dot then, right? That's the
yeah
right thing.
yeah
Right?
yeah.
And, but even in then, this refers to, because I've bound it. I've excluded
Yeah.
the parent element. This will always refer to the app.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
No. This some of these dongles are really bad. This one breaks my computer Oh. Like it'll just shut my computer down sometimes. Only specifically when I'm using this one. No, there's like this white cheap version of like C to HDMI, and there's like better ones that don't do this, but. Woo. Okay, next we're going to look at Flexbox. And Flexbox is like the greatest CSS tool in my opinion. It's ways to display sets of items or lists of things. Its whole power comes in correctly laying stuff out on your browser or within a container. If you have multiple things and you want them to be in a line or be nicely spaced, Flexbox is your pal and it's going to be your friend. There's two parts to Flexbox. There's your Flex container, and then inside of your Flex container, whatever is nested in there are Flex items. You have properties that you can set for both your Flex container and your Flex items. So the Flex container, we've got all of these properties. They're all optional. There's some defaults if we don't supply any values to them. And our Flex items also have a whole set of properties that we can set. So in our example, we have this nice main. So in here, we could decide that we wanted to display Flex. So Flex is a display property similar to our other display options like block inline or block inline together. We can also have Flex. If we just do that and that alone, and maybe we'll go back and change our divs to be a width of 300 pixels like we had before. Our font size here will crank up a bit. So by default, we're getting this. Actually, I'm also going to comment out our media stuff. We'll throw it back in a second, just so we can see what is Flexbox and what is not Flexbox. So we get 3 items equally taking up space. Each of these items we've given a width and we've also set a margin, right? Margins 2%, the width is 300 pixels. By default, Flex is going to display items. Let's look at the different properties. So Flex direction, by default, we're going to be doing a row. Flex wrap, by default, we're doing non-wrap. Flex flow is just these two shorthanded if we wanted to. By default, justify content, we're going to be doing Flex start. Align items are going to be, it's not on here. They're like, I don't think it's stretch, but we'll look at that. And then align content is also going to be Flex start. So our default behavior, we have a much nicer time resizing our three divs. Even at the small sizes here, we're not getting one dropping down, the weird stuff that was happening with our percentages. I didn't actually get around to figuring out why it was doing that. But Flexbox, don't do that, use Flexbox. What is happening is each of these boxes will try to take up their width that they've been set to, so 300 pixels. If they don't have the room to, Flexbox is conscious of the other items in your row, and they will shrink according to both their flex shrink property and how much space the other elements need. So in our case, each of our boxes are trying to be 300 pixels. They both have, or all three of them have the same content in them. So when we shrink them, they all shrink proportionally the same amount. If we go in and change the second one to have more content, Flexbox is going to prioritize that content when we get smaller, and we will have our two other divs, even though they all are 300 pixels, at smaller sizes. The priority is going to be, first it tries to meet the width sizing, then it tries to meet the content sizing, and if it can't meet that, we do get some like overflow. If we drop this down, actually instead of dropping it down, we'll just make main be 100. We can also see that for bigger sizes, or I guess we can't see it yet. And we'll drop this to 250 width. For bigger sizes, Flexbox makes use of the extra space according to our justify content rule. So that's our first option. If we come in here, I grab the main, which is being flexed on, and we say justify content. I said the default is flex start, so that's what we have right now, nothing changes. We can do flex end if we want all of the elements in a row to, when they have space, be shifted to the right. We can do space around, which equally adds space on either side of each flex element. We can do space, we can do space between, which does not add space on our start and our end, but spaces evenly throughout the items. We can also do like center. There's a bunch of different options here. Center, so all of our extra space is sent here and here. But then when we're getting smaller, we get the same default behavior. The other Flexbox property that we can start setting is to align items. And this one's a little harder to see because right now our main div, its height is just as big as the elements inside of it. So we don't have any additional space above or below our flex items. But if we add some additional space and we say main, the height should be maybe the minimum height should be 400 pixels. We'll notice that the same way our elements are dynamic sized at smaller things, for our vertical spacing, or rather I should say for the axis opposite to how we have opposite to our direction. So our direction is row, the opposite is the column. Our flex items will fill as much space as they can. So we can crank this width up to, sorry, not the width. We can crank this height up to like 800. And the default behavior is just that each flex item will fill as much space as it can in the opposite direction of the flex direction. So to better illustrate that, we can say flex direction, and we're doing row. If we switch it to column, we don't have them filling up all of the space. We have them filling up to their height or their width. But if we pop off width, and we get also they're trying to take up as much vertical space. So the order of priority, least priority is, hey, let's just take up as much width as we can. Then we're going to check the width of an element of a flex item. Then we check the flex basis, and we'll look at that in a second. And then lastly, they check if they can meet the content requirement needs. So the content needs of this one is like that wide, this one is this wide, and this one is this wide. There are a lot of properties for both the flexbox and the flex items, and initially it's going to seem very complex, but the good thing about flexbox is all of these things behave really well together. You don't get like weird quirks where you're getting extra margin popping out or stuff overflowing. It is designed so that you can throw any combination of those properties, and it's not going to do unexpected behavior. It will really behave according to how you set these. Jumping back to, if we take off flex direction, actually, if we put our initial settings back, the next property we were looking at was align items. So by default, each of our items does not really need to be aligned because they're taking up 100 space, 100 height. But if we do align items center, our items will only take up as much space as they need, and they will be aligned in the center. We can also do flex end or flex start. So justify content is taking our flex row or column and moving it in the direction of that column or row. So when we have a row, it's moving it left and right. Our align items is moving the entire row, the entire flex row, up and down according to its free space. So when we're doing a row, flex items is, I lost my screen draw, is top to bottom, and justify content is left to right. The third property for alignment, and this one depends on Right now, all of our content boxes are uniform. They're all 300 height and width, roughly. But say we give a new class big, and big has a height of 400 pixels and a width of 400 pixels. And we just give big to the second div. Right now, we are explicitly defining this guy's height. So again, our preference is 100%, or least preference is 100%, and then we're looking at, does it have an explicit height? So we have an explicit height, so we're going with that. And now when we align items, we also get some additional behavior where our items are aligned in the center of their vertical space, but also in relation to each other, they're aligned center. So the smaller element has a baseline that is center to the bigger element. And we can even change how each of these divs is aligned, not only in their row, but in relation to their friends. So we can grab just this guy, the big, and we can do align self, and we can say end, or baseline. No, let's do head. There we go, like flex end. So you have your overall properties, and then with each of your smaller flex boxes, you can decide how they are positioned. Whoa. So that's, we can give a new number to represent its order. We can change how it grows and how it shrinks when it has less or more space. Flex basis, this is the initial length of, or initial, I guess length makes sense. It's the initial length in the direction of your flex direction. So flex basis, if we're in a row, will be width. Flex basis, if we're in a column, will be height. And flex basis has higher priority over a width or height. So if you want to set flex basis, and you should be setting flex basis as opposed to width and height when you're using Flexbox, because it plays nicer with the other Flexbox rules, particularly grow and shrink. And then grow and shrink tell you proportionately how much a thing should grow or shrink when it can. Meaning, if we go with this big guy and we do a flex shrink of 4, it's going to shrink at a faster rate than the other two when it has room to shrink. So from here to here, that's when we start to shrink. It goes much faster than the other two. The default for all of these is like 0, but, or actually, no, I think it's 1. And you can think of them as proportionate to one another. So if I set the flex shrink for 1, 2, and 3 all to 4, it's the same as if all of them were 1. It's like this shrinks, if it's at 2 and this is at 1, this shrinks twice as much as this one. So you give them numbers, and then Flexbox internally like adds those numbers up and finds a fraction of the total space to give each of your flex guys. We can also flex grow, and this guy will grow at 2 or 3. Why does it give me this guy's height, but not this guy's? Oh, there we go. I don't know if we have enough space for it to grow, but if we shrink it back down to a width of 200, and then we give it a flex grow of 3, it will now take up extra space instead of just getting to the max flex spaces. The last two properties to quickly jump into. For our flex box, the default we said was a flex wrap is no wrap, meaning each of these guys will dynamically grow and shrink according to their size, even if they are under their desired width or under their desired flex basis. But if we do a flex wrap of wrap, we now get behavior that's similar to block inline, where each of these guys will try to hit 300 pixels, their flex width in this case, and if they get smaller than that, they will drop down. But they do so in like a nice manner, so we still see that this number 2 is like growing and shrinking a bit. That's because we have like a flex grow on there. So internally, Flexbox is thinking, is there space for 1, 2, and 3 at their like minimum widths? If there isn't, it lets 2 grow. And then once there is enough space for all 3, it drops them in and it puts 2 at its like minimum width. So you can still, even though you have kind of inline block behavior, you can still get the like dynamic squishy growing and shrinking that is like characteristic of Flexbox. Oh, the last thing we were talking earlier about percentages. So if we give all of these div instead of a width of 250, if we give it 100%, in Flexbox, this just means take up all of the available space that you have. So it's not going to be 100% of the Flexbox itself. It's going to be proportionally how much space does 1, 2, and 3 allow me to have. 2, we set to have a width of 200 pixels. So 1 and 3 take that into account, and they grow up until they have no more space left. I know you guys have like seen this, but just like a double reminder, there's both Flex Froggy and Flexbox Zombies, which is surprisingly in depth for a game about Flexbox. Flexbox Frog, you don't have to do any setup. You can just start playing right away. And the goal is to get like your 3 frogs onto the lily pads. Each of your frogs is a flex item, and the whole like pond is your flex box. So given your different properties, you have to slowly work up to getting each one of these on the thing. So this is level 5, but like the first one is pretty simple. You start off your frogs on the left, and then you go justify content, and you throw them to the end, and he goes there. If you have time, definitely go through this, because there's like all these different properties in here, and it just helps to just get repetition on, okay, I can do flex end, I can do center, I can do space around, which is going to be center in this case, and just get the repetitions in to know your different properties. In our case, what would be best? How do we want our layout to look? I think our media queries were still good. But for our spaces or our screen widths above 600 pixels, so when we get, oh, we have to change them because remember we were changing this to 100% and that doesn't matter when it's Flexbox. So instead of 100%, we can go, don't need that. We can go flex direction column. Oh, on our Flexbox. And then I guess we probably do want our elements still to be wide. So we can do flex basis of 100%. And we'll make sure here, this is also our there we go. And this is our like exception rule because we're setting the big to have this height and width of, I mean, we could still make it big if we wanted to. So maybe on small sites, we want these guys to be like big blocks of text to take up as much as they can. This guy's like an image. Maybe we still need equal proportions. So we leave it like this. We could say align self center. And then for him, we get the guy in the center. And then for bigger ones, we drop them down into their rows. And same, these are maybe like big blocks of text. And then the middle one is that same thing that we want to keep with hard width and height. Any questions on the Flexbox stuff we ran through? I know there's like, I know for sure we're not comfortable with all of the different things, but I hope this was just like a demonstration of like there's so much you can do with Flexbox and it just behaves really nicely when you start to throw things in there. As always, just like experiment with your Chrome tools to just change these different properties and see what happens. Oh, and then when we get really big, maybe we'll throw on for all of our divs like a flex grow of 1 so that they take up more space. Cool, there's no questions. The last thing we wanted to think about was Sass. So Sass, it's a couple things, and it's kind of confusing how they're separating, but it's a preprocessor scripting language that is interpreted or compiled into cascading style sheets. All that means is people, I don't know exactly when Sass came out, but a while ago kind of got tired with writing standard CSS syntax, and they're like, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. It's kind of like tedious to have to. Well, the original Sass people were really extreme. They're like, I don't even want to have to put like brackets. I don't even want to have to put like semicolons, or like they're like, how can I strip this to just be as pure and like easy to do as possible? So a preprocessor is the idea that we can take a language or like a convention like CSS and have a new convention on how to write it, but not a new language or but not a new language. So Sass is this other convention, other way that we can write CSS. You write it in a Sass file, and then you run it through a preprocessor that just converts it into standard CSS. Just from that alone, we can probably think that there's no new functionality that Sass is going to give to us that can't be done in CSS some way. So there's no like new features with Sass. It's just how can we write CSS in an easier, maybe more efficient way. So that's how it started with. Sass stands for syntactically awesome style sheets. They have the same expressiveness like we saw, but the other complication comes in that so people come out, they're like, hey, we want to make better CSS. They create a preprocessor, which is the thing that changes the document into CSS, and they also make a convention on how to write new CSS, and they call both the preprocessor and the new convention Sass. Sass, let's look up some syntax. Sass looks like this. You strip down of like semicolons, you're stripped down of like curly brackets and so on and so forth. It's nice, but then people came along and said, hey, we like this whole idea of making CSS easier to write and adding some new things in there, but we don't want to have to write our CSS like this for two main reasons. One, it invalidates all of our old CSS. We should be able to take our old CSS, copy and paste it into a Sass file and like not have any problems. You can't do that with the Sass SASS convention. And they also said, we want it, like, why do we have to learn a new way to do CSS? Why can't we take the existing CSS that we know and kind of like and just make it a bit better? Because of that, they created a second what was the word I just used? So the preprocessor, and we have the convention, I guess, or the format for writing Sass. They created a second convention or format that is more aligned with traditional CSS, and that is called SCSS. So we have files with extensions SCSS, and we also have files with the extension SASS. All of that, we're just going to be focusing on SCSS because it builds off of standard CSS syntax. And we can do some extra new things. Sass being syntactically awesome style sheet, the awesomeness that it provides, it gives us the ability to use variables, to use nesting within our CSS. We can do more operators. We have imports, mix-ins, inheritance. These are all mostly tools for reusing code. So we can take a file like this. This is our style.css. And we can even just like copy everything in here. We can create a new file and call it style.scss. And this will be valid SCSS. There's nothing different about it. But with SCSS, there's some extra things that we can add. Instead of having to do main and then main space div, we can nest div inside of main. So we get a more visible hierarchical layout of our SCSS. That is like one thing that we can do. We can also create variables and other stuff. But if we were to create a new file in here and call it style.sass, see both of these got marked by the little SAS symbol. If we were to paste all of our code in here, this would not be valid SAS. Both of these we can run through the preprocessor and get out CSS. So they work the same that way. It's just different syntax on how we want to write our like new awesome CSS.
So if you were to link that SCSS with HTML, you would do after it has been preprocessed?
Yeah, so good question. Let's just delete this guy. So how do I use this? I can't go in here and go, I'm going to link a style sheet to the SCSS style. According to the browser, according to like HTML, it has no idea what SCSS is or what SASS is. Those are just like unknown files to it. It can only interpret CSS. So we're always going to be importing CSS into our HTML files, but we can get them as an output of our SCSS. So before we look at our particular code, here's an example SCSS file illustrating some of the new things that we have. So we have nesting here. These are unordered lists that are inside of a nav tag, or lists that are inside of a nav tag. We can, it would probably actually make more sense if we did something like that. So list items that are inside an unordered list that are inside a nav. At the top here, when you see a $sign, this is creating a variable. So we're saying the primary color will be red, and then anywhere in the document where we're using $sign primary color, we're accessing that variable. This is really helpful for setting, like, in this case, a set of maybe theme colors that you're using for your page, a set of maybe standard font sizes. We have like small font, and we set it to 12 pixels. And then we have like large font, we set it to another thing. That way we aren't repeating ourselves throughout our CSS, and we also later can change like the whole color theme of our app with just changing like 3 lines. If we're referencing the primary color, the secondary color, and like the accent color from these 3 variables, we can swap them out at any time, and our references will all be updated. Down here, we have something called a mix-in. A mix-in is kind of like a function in CSS. So we declare this mix-in, we call it a transform mix-in. It takes in one parameter, and based on that parameter, kind of outputs a bunch of style. So here we have 2 boxes, and we're using the transform mix-in to get one box that has a rotation of 30 degrees and another box that has a rotation of 50 degrees. We can take patterns and use them over and over. In a similar way, we can use, here they're called, hey, they're not, let's see, what's the, I'm not sure what they're called actually. They are, so we saw mix-ins, but there's another way. It's essentially just declaring a custom block of CSS, and that's with a %sign. So we can do %, and maybe all of our boxes had a standard layout. This is our layout, and in here we have a padding of 20 pixels and a margin of 20 pixels. Then in our box, we can in addition to using our mixin, we can also extend the layout. So this is an example of the box inheriting from this layout. This is where I was looking up. I'm not sure exactly what this is called. It's like a, we'll look it up in a second. But these are tools that help us to reduce the repeat like CSS that we have throughout our documents. And then all of these things, like they are possible within CSS, and we can see that because we can convert this SCSS file into CSS, and there's a number of ways to do that using the preprocessor. There's a Node SAS module that you can use where when you load your server, you can automatically run all of your CSS files through the preprocessor and get, or your SCSS files through the preprocessor and get a list of your CSS files that you can then include in your project. You can also use the command line if you have SAS, which is a Node module, like globally installed. Oh, this is Ruby SAS actually. And we can go SAS, you choose an input file. So we have example.scss. And this can be an SCSS or a SAS file. For your purposes, it's most likely going to be an SCSS. And then you decide what it should output. So we want to output example.css. I hit enter, and we pop back over to our code. We see a new CSS file called example.css, and there's another file here, the CSS map. This keeps track of the history of this file to this file, so it knows when I run another SAS SCSS to CSS, whether it has to do a full preprocess. And this is, the exact functionally equivalent CSS code to this example.css. Anywhere that we use that red, that primary color variable has been substituted for red. All of our nested things are now spaced nested selectors. It's still, I don't know if this is because we had a bad tab in, oh yeah, this is weird. And then anywhere we were using a mixin or we were inheriting certain chunks of CSS, it just takes all of that and inserts it as a block into your properties list. So there's nothing revolutionary about it. It just makes your CSS a bit less repetitive. It makes it a bit clearer to read when you're doing nested CSS. It allows you to find some variables, although variables are now supported in CSS, so you can use variables with native CSS. And it also allows you to do calculations easier. So you can do calculations in SCSS with just like numbers times 20 pixels. Whereas in CSS, if you want to do calculations, you have to use calc. So margin top would be calc keyword, and then we can do any kind of math operators in here. And then pixels. Some of these were added directly as a result of SAS. Like SAS had calculations, SAS had variables, and CSS said, okay, well, we should also like support that natively. But like variables and calculations are not functionally different from CSS. Like here, this is equivalent to first assigning a variable and then putting the color. It's just not as easy. So our project, we copied everything over to SCSS. We could actually delete this if we wanted to. And then in real development practice, what you're going to do is have this file watched so that anytime it's changed, it outputs a new CSS file. Or you'll have your server or whatever is serving your files to the user check the SCSS file to see if it needs to preprocess and spit out a new CSS file before it gives them those resources. In our case, we don't have really a server. We're just accessing the files. So we can use Sass here to specify the same way we did before, a file and an output file. And then we can also do the flag watch so that Sass will pre-process or start the process on this SCSS file anytime we change it. So any change we update, we'll get a new version of this file here. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah. So we need our flag leading. And it wants us to be a little more clear with our input-output when we're using that flag. So we got the initial write, we got the initial output here, style.css. If we maybe extract our colors to some variables. The primary color, our secondary color, the wheat, and our accent color would be light cyan. And then we can replace our salmons with the primary color. We can replace the wheats, it's only one, with the secondary color. And as I save this, our watch is detecting the changes and it's mapping like a new output to our style file. Then in your developing process, you're just going to be touching this SCSS files. You don't want to be coming in and altering anything here, because any change that you make in this context, if I then make a change here, let's change the width to 90, you'll have it like overwritten by the next preprocessor thing. Sweet. Any questions on Sass and SCSS? Cool. We'll wrap it up there then. I'll send you the notes and you can play around with this a little bit if you want. I guess the biggest takeaway Media queries are nice. Flexbox is even nicer. Get some repetition in with one of those games or just using it yourself just because there's a lot of properties. Thanks, guys. Yeah.